So if I had a second hand, I would say I'd be starting a countdown pretty shortly, but I don't. So it is 2 o'clock right now. So I think we can just get going. All right, let me see here.
All right, are we ready to head off, Jerry?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do the introduction.
Okay.
So, hi, everybody. We're going to get started now. My name is Jerry Lewis, and I'll be moderating this session along with fellow NWE Learn board member Nina Fox. The session title, as you can see, is using OER materials to create a seamless learning experience. The presenters are Andrew Blick and Todd Waters, and they will be introducing themselves shortly. But first, a few housekeeping items. If you have questions, you can post them to Zoom chat. And I believe the presenters will answer them at the end. The session is being recorded, as you probably have been alerted to, and will be made available on our conference website once it's done being captioned. The speaker slides will also be available from our conference website, and we'll post them in chat, I believe. I think that'll be up to the speaker. Finally, we'd like to say thank you to our sponsor, HonorLock, for helping us make this conference possible. HonorLock is all about humanizing online proctoring. If you want to chat with them, head over to their channel in our conference Slack, and we'll put the link in the chat. And now I'll hand it over to our speaker, or speakers, as the case may be.
Thank you, Jerry. So I'll go ahead and introduce myself, and I'll turn it over to Todd to do his introduction. I am Andrew Blick. I am a Director of Instructional Design and Curriculum Services for Western Washington University. I'm also faculty at Michigan Tech University. And my interest in online comes from both supporting faculty in developing and teaching online courses, and from teaching courses primarily online. So Todd, if you want to, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Todd Waters, and I am an instructional designer at Whatcom Community College in Bellingham, Washington. I'm also teaching faculty. I teach communication studies and professional readiness and communication courses in the business program that we have at Whatcom. I have been teaching online for about 13 years and have been working as an instructional designer now for about 4 years. So my interest in this is pretty self-explanatory, and it's something that I am just excited about being able to share some experiences with you all today.
All right, so in terms of what we're going to cover today, we're going to start off with our introductions, which we just did. Then we're going to go into our session objectives, so cover what you're going to learn. Then we're going to define some of the terms that we use throughout our session. So primarily when we talk about transparency and seamless course design, and then give some examples in terms of how you can think about transparent and seamless content and assessments. Then we're going to have a small group discussion and end with questions and additional discussion.
Session objectives are as follows. Participants in today's workshop will be able to describe elements of transparency in the teaching and learning process, describe seamless course design, and discuss how principles of transparency and OER can create seamless teaching and learning experiences. So when we think about elements of transparent course design, first of all, I want to say too that when, as we present this information, we're kind of talking to educators and we're also talking to instructional designers, and we acknowledge that some people, kind of like Andrew and myself, may be wearing both hats at once, or may have done one prior, or will be doing one later. So we're going to try and keep our examples and what we share and everything a little bit more broadly applicable, but acknowledging that this process takes place at multiple different levels, and also depends a little bit too in the type of work and the types of learners and or students that you're trying to engage with. So we just want to make that really evident just up front before we start getting into some of the meat and potatoes of what we're covering today. So when we look at transparent course design, we're going to, for the purposes of this presentation, define it as the process of developing clear, accessible, and equitable courses. And when we think about transparent design, we're going to be thinking about applying it in two primary contexts, or through two primary lenses. The first one is going to be through the process of instructional design, of intentionally selecting course content, materials, and outcomes that align with student needs and that are represented throughout the duration of the course experience. And also universal design for learning, which takes into account neuroscience and the ways in which the human brain processes and responds to information and learns information, and that we are all many and varied in the ways in which our brains engage with information, process, learn, and retain. So when we think about the idea of using transparent course design in association with instructional design and with universal design, we're looking at applying it into these pretty broad circumstances and contexts, and acknowledging that there are multiple facets at play. So as we go through some of our examples and some of the specifics that we want to share with all of you today to create that seamless and transparent experience, we want to just remind everybody that we're trying to really apply it to some pretty broad perspectives and some pretty vast disciplines and lenses for looking at this.
All right, so shifting over to defining seamless course design, the seamless course design process is a goal of making all of your course content directly available in one place, usually through the learning management system. One of the primary goals is to, again, make it so students don't have to go digging or find any content from any other system. So the definition that we have here is course content, materials, assignments, and assessments are all built directly into the LMS. The benefits of that are students have access to everything that they need for the course in one place. They don't ever have to go outside of the course for any sort of material. And that is inclusive of textbook type material, additional resources, videos. So there's a lot of embedding, a lot of copying and pasting and whatnot. The other advantage to this is the faculty has full control and access of all course materials and content. So they get to decide how it looks. So kind of the aesthetics of their course design, they get to decide if they want to pull from one OER textbook, they can copy it over, and OER again is positioned nicely for this type of work. Or if they want to bring every single chapter from a different OER book and they don't want students linking out to multiple different structures in terms of how OER is presented, it's a great way of just dumping it all into their course, organizing it, making it look clean, chunking it out for their students, and again, presenting it so that students don't have to go around and navigate different systems. So those are the primary tenets of seamless course design. And again, as I talked about, and we move to the next slide, one of the great benefits of OER is that we can do that legally. So, we can go through, we can find, there's plenty of OER search tools that are available. There's plenty of OER just resources in general that we can grab. We can copy down entire chapters of textbooks. We can make changes to those. And what we're going to show you in a few minutes is that we've both done this and then do some of those, make some of those direct edits, again, chunk out content in ways. So we're sometimes remixing, sometimes revising, sometimes reuse. So again, working within the parameters of how we're supposed to use OER to make a very quality learning experience that is designed around our course, rather than kind of using OER as people use traditional textbooks, which is let's see how we can fit it into our course. So it's truly, I think, embracing the mission of OER a little bit better through a transparent course design and seamless course design process. All right.
So one of the things that I laugh about now when I think about teaching, and for those of us who are teachers, I know that a lot of the time when we think back to our first experience teaching, a lot of the time we sort of emulated our process of teaching off of what we saw people do and what we thought was good, and maybe what we thought was good, and sometimes what we thought was good was not good in hindsight. And I know that for me, I came, from a typical institution where we were basically just handed a textbook as a student, right? Like you purchase a textbook and then each week is like a chapter of that text. And that was sort of rinse and repeat over and over and over again. I had some good learning experiences, to be sure, and most of them existed outside of anything to do with covering what was in that textbook. And I know that for me, when I started teaching, I emulated a lot of what I saw and the type of experience I had at a university. So when I was introduced to OER, I just kind of like my mind was blown because I thought, really, you don't have to use a publisher's textbook? Like it really just showed me how challenging. I never even bothered to question the status quo, and never, as an educator and as a teacher and as someone who takes that very seriously, I never questioned that was just the process. That was just how it worked, right? So learning about OER, as Andrew talked about, being this process where you can take information and place it together in a way where it is built around the learner and the learner's experiences and enhances the experience of the learner, rather than as an educator who is designing a course, taking an existing text and building a course around that and scaffolding the best of our ability around that. That was very new to me, and something that was so freeing and so wonderful to experience, because I thought, finally, this is what I've been doing in my classes that I've been teaching a long time anyway, AKA not always going through what was in the textbook, but now I have some content and some information that supports in a very clear, scaffolded, meaningful way what I'm talking about with my students. So when we're creating these transparent and seamless experiences through our content, our course content, using OER is a given. You can find so much information that is pertinent to your subject matter. And what you can do from there is you can pull content from other disciplines or other lenses, other theories that pertain to the information that you think is most important for your students to learn in order to be successful in achieving the learning outcomes. And you can do it in a way that creates a seamless experience, because it is all going to be contained in your course experience. So whether you have like a text that like one big text that the students are going to move through in your course, or you have multiple, you are able to decide what those are. And therefore, it's so much more your experience that you're providing for students, rather than you trying to make something work that you may not always be super supportive of or feel super passionate about. That's something I really appreciate about OER, and that I think helps really allow for a seamless experience. Something that we know through research and instructional design in particular is that learners like being able to access all of the text and content inside of the course experience. So when we're talking about using an LMS, and I know Andrew and I both use Canvas at our institutions, when you're using Canvas or Blackboard to create your course experiences, students do much better when all of the content that they need to be successful exists in that LMS. And that includes readings, that includes all the assignment instructions, that includes videos embedded into the content within that LMS. If we are eliminating the amount of linking out, and Andrew and I will show you some examples of this, then we are actually servicing our students in multiple ways that actually helps them connect more with the content. Another way that I like to describe instructional design to folks who come to me like for a consultation and they're like, what the hell is instructional design? Like, I have this vague sense of what it is, but I don't know what it is. One of the things that I like to say to them is it's the process of intentionally designing a course that removes barriers for questioning why things are what they are and getting down to the business of learning. And as a teacher, that's a very gratifying thing to be able to do, because all we want to do is teach our students our content and have them engage with it in meaningful ways. So if we give them transparent and seamless experiences with that, one of the best ways we could do that is allow them all to navigate it in one centralized experience. Accessibility, the relatability of the content, and the diversity of the materials included is also paramount to the students' engagement with the content that we are curating and then sharing with them. So if we're talking about accessibility, how readily accessible is content? And I think about that as like capital A accessible. So ADA, is it compliant? Is it something that is equitable in terms of our students who require and necessitate that in order to receive and consume the information? And is it accessible in that can I as a student access this information in a way where I can forge connections with it and understand what I'm supposed to be taking from this? And there's some key ways to do that we'll show you in a moment here. Is the content relatable to me as a student and my experiences? Am I seeing myself in the examples that are being provided by the instructor and in the instruction? Am I able to relate to the examples that I'm seeing take place in the text and in the content that's being shared with me? One of the best things that we can do with OER is we can really decolonize a lot of the curriculum that we have been force-fed for such a long time, and that is sometimes pushed a lot from bigger range publishers. We can really do a good job parsing that apart and then amplifying voices of people who have been marginalized and have not been put center stage. So we're able to do that really well by incorporating content that is OER. And then, of course, in accordance with Universal Design for Learning, giving our students multiple ways to parse through the information. We're giving them things that they can read. We're giving them things that they can watch. If we're teaching hybrid or in person, we're giving them things that they can physically touch, tactile, that they can move, that they can write about, that they can expand upon, that they can reflect on, that they can reflect to their own lived experiences and their communities, that they can talk about with other people in the class, that they can debate about, that they can have different types of discourse and communication experiences, that we're giving a smorgasbord of ways for our learners to get to those outcomes that we have assigned and mapped to our experience in the course. So this is an example of one my professional readiness and communication class. And I know that I just flipped to the slide and there's like a lot of information here, so I'll walk through it. So what I've done here, so this is Canvas for those of you who don't use it. I hope I haven't worked in D2L. I'm not sure if it's even called D2L anymore, whatever it is now. If it is still called D2L, then great. Or Blackboard, haven't worked in either of those for quite a few years. So I'm not sure how the functionality translates over, but something that I've tried this quarter, just this quarter, and that I thought about doing over the summer that's been really fun for me is if you look at the left image, that is a homepage I have in my professional readiness and communication class. And what I decided to do was eliminate the use of modules. And as an instructional designer, that kind of goes against a lot of like my core belief system that things need to be modularized through using modules. But what I did was I modularized information. I still believe that very firmly, but I modularized it in a different way. So in this left-hand panel, what you can see are the various weeks. So like week 0, week 1, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What I do is manually on Sundays when the weeks begin for my class, I go in and I link each of those week 1, I would link that to a week 1 page that I've designed in advance that then the students click on from this homepage and are taken to. So on the right-hand side, you can see week 3. So what students do is when week 3 began is I linked to that and then they would click on it and it would take them to this week 3 page. And the first thing that they can see is the overview. And this is also consistent, which is really important for our learners that we have consistency in our design. So every week looks like this. It has the same organizational structure. So we have an overview at the top. It's telling students what they're going to gain from this week's experience in class. Oh, and just also so everyone knows, this is a fully online asynchronous course. Then I have the outcomes associated with the week's learning. And I have heard some people say or ask, what do students really care about outcomes? And my response to that is twofold. First of all, I don't think sometimes students don't know that outcomes are important because they haven't been told that they're important. So that's a conversation that we get to have as instructors in advance, that these have been mapped to our course. These are intended outcomes for you after you move through this experience. And it is my job as your instructor to create a course where you have a high likelihood, if you work in this class, to achieve these outcomes. So sometimes just some transparency is really helpful in helping students understand why they're important. So then in the future, when they see them mapped to certain weeks in our classes, they understand, okay, so like Todd did this on purpose. This isn't just like what is this nonsense? He like intentionally laid this out here for me. I actually find just a quick conversation about outcomes and why they're important is vital for students and really helps demystify them. Right underneath that, I have the reading. So something you'll see there is those are obviously links out to other pages in my Canvas course. So what you can see is when the students click on this, so like this top one, or actually I think this is the nonverbal communication. Yeah, so when they click on that middle link, learn about the principles of nonverbal communication, they'll click on that and then they're taken to what you can kind of see on the right side here. This is all OER. And what I did is I took a pre-existing OER text on professional readiness. I took another one on communication competency. And I took another one specifically about interpersonal communication. And I adapted it. And I did the work of placing it into my Canvas pages. So I was able to essentially design my textbook. And it is a lot of work. It's definitely something that like you might see people, you might do this and people might see it and go, oh, I want to do that this quarter. And you go, okay. But depending on your level of comfort with working with the LMS and finding information, this may be something you need to really piecemeal. So that's just something I like to put out in advance. But you can pick what pictures work for you. And I know that I've solicited feedback from students. I know that they really appreciate having all of the reading right there. I also put this together with my with our OER librarian into a course pack that students can either download and read in a different way, or they can get it from our bookstore. I think it's like $8, and it's just a bound copy of this information. The other thing I have always is below the reading on the left-hand side over here, I have an area where students can watch or listen too. So I create these audio, and I do call them audio lectures because I actually encourage the students to listen to me while they do something else. Like they can sit and watch it and I'll have some PowerPoint slides, but I never just sit and ramble for 45 minutes. I say, go take a walk and listen. Fold your laundry, do your chores, whatever it is, drive and listen. And I like to just make it in a way where students don't feel like they have to sit and stare at a screen, because I'm already asking them to do that if they're reading on their screen. So I like to mix it up a little bit. It also, just as an aside, if you are creating information this way and content for students this way, this is such a great way for you to kind of release a little bit of the pressure of always being on camera and having all your PowerPoints work well. I know sometimes that's an important thing if you have visuals that you want the students to see, but if you want it to function a little bit more like a podcast that one would listen to, it's fun. It's fun to do it this way.
Okay, so this is shifting over to my class, and this class is on technical and professional communication. And my audience for this particular class are mostly seniors in engineering, computer science, and science field. So it's their capstone writing class. And again, one of the interesting things I find about it is that they're coming to this at their end of their program of study, and it's something that usually they're also involved in. You know, a lot of them are doing internships, a lot of them are doing extra activities beyond kind of the traditional academic experience. So a seamless course design and having all the materials readily available to them, I find is something that they really value. It's something that, you know, as Todd said, they are able to engage with the material. As an instructor too, the other thing I really like about this, and I know this is a little bit surveilly sometimes, but I can go through and see where they are. I can see how much time they're spending on different pages. I can see, you know, if I put a reading up there and no one's engaging with it, then, you know, that's a sign to me to go back and review, what is this reading doing? Is that a super long one, so they're only spending 30 seconds on this page because they see it, you know, they have to scroll a mile down to get out of it, or is it something else? You know, for example, if I'm using videos that are in Panopto or whatever, I check engagement stats there and whatnot. So in terms of module structures, I do use modules, and all modules I have the exact same general layout for. So I start with an overview, and in that overview, you can see a sample over on the right. I have the title. I then go into an introduction about what the module is. I give a module overview in a video format. And that's something that early on, I think they can watch those or not. I give additional explanations about assignments, activities. So they have all that information about the logistics of the module there. And then I go into learning outcomes and then have that task list ready for them. That all corresponds again to the information that's presented in the module learning commons, or sorry, learning content and those module learning activities. And then in terms of the actual pages that I use, if you want to navigate to the next slide. Those are, and again, I use the same format for everything. So I start off with text and articles. And again, the first example here, this is from a module on research practices. So I start off with a reading from an OER textbook from BYU. And that information, BYU has a fantastic, in this case, you know, for the way they host their content, for their media and communications classes or OER resources, they've created a very nice looking textbook. It's super engaging. And I don't want to, you know, obviously take that information and say, this is all mine, I made it. So I cite the author, give all of the attribution where attribution is due. And then I just bring everything over, and as close as I can with HTML, I just replicate the structure of that book. So if that includes call outs, I do call outs. If it includes interactive elements, I can recreate those in H5P. If it includes images, I put the images in there, make sure that they have alt text. But one of the other advantages I do is I have the same style. So all the readings have the same header structure. They have the same way I do call outs. They have the same style of image attributions and citations, et cetera. So again, as they're going through the content, it looks like if using our term seamless, it's a seamless course design experience. So a question came up in the chat, which I'm going to address now because I think it's relevant, about, you know, articles and you know, external sources that maybe aren't the best for doing this with. So if it's a newspaper article, for example, or something else that maybe it's not OER, so it's you know, an article that's available in a journal, I make sure that the PDF is available in the course site. And I know there are limitations with accessibility there. So, you know, I make sure I use Ally and then also link out to an accessible version of that. So a lot of times your library will have access to accessible versions of articles, but you have to actually link out to, so it can run through the library systems in terms of authentication. So I make sure that any article I have also has an accessible version available, linked out through the library website. If it does not have an accessible version available, I don't use that PDF. And I only have maybe 3 or 4 PDFs or PDF articles in this class. And I've tried to make all of those optional readings anyway, just because of, again, I know PDFs can be cumbersome, and I prefer that students be able to navigate this on any, really on any device that they want to. So there's another piece of the testing process that I do with this is I have the Canvas teacher and student app, and I know those are, you know, fairly limited, and in some cases clunky or don't perform very well. But I find that's exceptionally useful for going through and testing just what would it look like if a student were to, you know, view this content on an iPhone? What would it look like if they were using this as a, you know, on a tablet? And I try to run through these articles or each of my modules before I publish those modules out. In addition to text and articles, very similar to Todd, I have a lecture content section where I, you know, have my lecture video or PowerPoint or whatever it may be. Then I have video content, which has external videos, and it cut off here, but there's some YouTube videos there. Below that, I have audio content, so, you know, podcasts, etc. And then and I customize that for the module. So there'll be some modules that won't have external video content. It will just have text and articles, lecture content, and maybe podcasts or external resources. So again, I customize each module for what they're being exposed to, but at the same time, keep everything as consistent as possible, and follow that sequential order that is parallel from module to module. So they have a similar experience, and they know how to they know how to navigate the course from module one, and they don't have to ever focus on learning something new or suddenly being pushed into another system that they may not be super familiar with.
So another really important piece, in addition to seamless content, is providing transparent assessments. So what we know about research in transparency and assessment is kind of similar to some of the pieces that we've already talked about. So we know that our learners want to be able to access all of the information that is going to be relevant to them being successful on an assessment in one place. So the way I think about it is like if you're handing out a piece of paper that has instructions for an assignment for students to complete, that they should be able to read that piece of paper front and back or multiple pages, whatever it is, but everything that they need to understand to be successful, probably excluding like familiarity with content that they've worked on throughout the weeks, everything should be there for them so that they're not rifling through other pages or information that is going to help them understand how to deliver what type of assessment it is that you're looking for. So something else that's extremely important here is providing examples of previous work to students so that they can see what examples of not just, and so here's something interesting is a lot of people I know provide examples of exemplary work. They'll say this is like A-level work. Here's an example of what that would look like. A really cool thing to do for learners is provide them with an example of what we might think of as like an average, middle of the bell curve, C-level assignment. Because first of all, not everyone is there to do that high-level, exemplary A-level work. I think we've all been there before where we're like, that's not me today. That's not me today. And we're more like, you know what, today it's a C for me. So I think showing students what that looks like is never a bad thing. I don't think it encourages people to not aim higher. And I also think that it's a great opportunity to put your learners in a position where they can consider and then articulate, maybe in a little activity, why this submission would be considered average and why this other one would be considered exemplary. And I think that those are really helpful in transparency because it shows the students and the learners what they need to do to achieve the marks that they may be looking for. Hopefully their goal is not just the end game is not just the grades, it's to learn. But in order to show them what you're looking for, this is a great way to do that. And another good way that is showing rubrics as well. How am I being assessed? And encouraging learners to reference those rubrics in advance before they even begin working on their submission for you. So designing rubrics is an art. It is not an easy thing to do. I have designed many a bad rubric, like embarrassingly bad. And it takes a lot of time and refinement to ensure that they really assess what you are trying to say that they assess, and the two, that they align with your outcomes of your course. So for example, if you're like every rubric under the sun includes something, especially for like writing, includes written papers, includes something about like grammar and spelling and whatnot, and like punctuation and flow and word choice and all of that. But according to rubric rules, if you're not teaching how to do that in your class, if your class is not a writing centered course, that probably shouldn't be a giant component of what you're assessing to determine the level of the student success on that in that product. So there's a lot of ways that we can learn to be better at rubric design, and that's a workshop for another time, but that's something just to think about. And another cool thing that you can give students is the knowledge, or excuse me, the steps that they need to be successful. So some of you may be familiar with TILT. It's an acronym for Transparency in Learning and Teaching. It's based on research out of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and Harvard. And it is a framework that shows assessment designers how to create assessments that are transparent, because we know that when students have what they need to be successful, they are more likely to really demonstrate their learning rather than fret over things that are confusing in terms of the design of the assessment. So that, and if you look on this picture on the right, TILT asks us as designers and assessment designers to consider the purpose, to communicate what is the purpose of this assessment. And specifically in that purpose, what are the skills and the knowledge that I, as a student completing this work, will be gaining by doing this? And this is one of the best parts of TILT. This is one of the things that I love, is because this answers the question, what's in it for me, besides me just getting a grade and jumping through a hoop in this class? What is the purpose of me doing this? What am I gaining that is not just essential to me as a student, but maybe me outside of, and I hate how this expression is used all the time in education, but out in the real world, what am I going to gain? Because class is not the real world. That's the fake world, the real world anyway. But what am I going to be gaining that I will be able to apply and it will help me? And I think that that's just such a great way to sell your assessment as well. And it also includes a piece about task. So what is the task at hand? What am I going to be doing specifically? And another thing I like to do is provide students with options for, again, this is in accordance with universal design for learning principles, but giving students different ways to demonstrate their understanding. So I give students different ways of displaying their knowledge and their work to me. And it does require flexibility on my part. It also required me to be a little uncomfortable, which was interesting for me just as an educator to experience that like the desire for everything to be my way all the time and be this one like really linear, refined, defined pathway. But when you open it up a little bit and you do a little bit of work and research into universal design in particular, and you design your assessments in ways that are a bit more broad, and you offer different ways the students can demonstrate their understanding, you'll be surprised. You may think no one's going to take this other option, but they will, and they'll be grateful for it too. And so you also include the criteria for success. So this is where you would include some of your examples. Just for the purposes of time, I'm going to move forward. But if you're not familiar with TILT, I strongly advise looking into it. It is a really meaningful way to re-examine your assessment design in your courses.
Okay, so this is an example of, again, for the same module that I was talking about earlier, my research methods module. This is an activity that I have students do, and I haven't tilted this assignment. So that's something that, to Todd's point, that's something that I would like to do in the future, because I just begin with instructions and then prompts. And in the overview video where I talk about this assignment, I give them a verbal explanation as to why I'm assigning this and why they're going about doing this activity. But again, that's something else that, in my notes of, next, and this is a semester-based class. So next semester, when I make revisions, that is something that I want to do to this to make it a little bit more robust. But again, in terms of structure and how this assignment is designed, I begin with the instructions. I have the prompts of what they're doing. And in this case, it's a two-part activity. They're supposed to go out and interview someone who's, really it's anyone who works in a technical or professional field, and that's very broadly defined. So I have all sorts of fascinating responses to this activity. But really what I want them to do is practice interviewing techniques. It's, they're supposed to cover both, they cover both quantitative and qualitative methodologies in this class. So that's something that this is an introduction to qualitative methodologies and a method that is pretty accessible and widely used in terms of the interview. So they do the interview, they write that up in a 2-column journal entry format, and then they submit a persona as well. So part of this then is, there's all these different components, and I want them to focus on being able to do the interview, being able to write up a persona, and not necessarily have, have to approach everything from a baseline, I guess, or ground zero. So I give them a template that they can use. And I tell them they can use this or they can do something on their own. And I would say for this assignment, about 90% of the students grabbed the template and used it. They did a phenomenal job, using the template, coming up with their questions and going through the motions of, conducting an interview, writing their interview notes, doing the analysis, writing up their persona, et cetera. But what I found interesting, as Todd mentioned this too, that the idea that they don't have to use this format, they can come up with something completely different. So I had a couple students use something in Excel that they came up with on their own. It was very interesting, and it kind of gives me some ideas for, next time I bring this assignment back. I may give some additional options rather than just the Google Drive file. And the institution that this class is for is a Google institution. So everything is done through Google Drive in terms of their word processing and whatnot. Anyway, so why the emphasis on having everything be anonymous? Yes, I can. This is because they share out with their peers later on. I don't want anything to be publicly identifiable. So that's, but I can get into that during our discussion in a little bit. All right, so let's go ahead and for our activity, given our time, what we can do is we were going to initially have breakout rooms, but since we have 20-ish minutes left, what if we just have open discussion related to these topics? So our initial thought was that, if you're in a faculty role, thinking about how you can position OER and create a transparent, seamless experience for your students. If you're an instructional designer, how can you help support faculty for these types of work? And then also, what are some opportunities for you or your institution? And thank you. Apparently, we have 7 minutes left, not 20. I'm all over the place. So if someone would, if anyone would like to share out or come up with ideas, you can unmute and we can chat.
This question is for Todd. I think it was Todd's course that I noticed that you had a press book that you used as one of your resources. That was your course, right? There was a BYU link, and then there was another Pressbooks link.
I'm pointing down because he's right. Okay. Andrew.
All right, and this is to Andrew. Okay, so I'm an instructional designer at the University of Washington, and a few years ago discovered Pressbooks, and I put it on the shelf. I'm like, I can't use that right now. And then earlier this year, my head exploded. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna put everything in a Pressbook. That way, when I designed the course, and if any other updates, I just update the Pressbook, and whoever is using the course gets the updated information without me having to say, hey, did you get this course information? So I experimented a lot with embedding the Pressbook inside Canvas. And we did a little pilot with some students looking at how many people actually click out or stay within. So my question to you, sorry about the long-winded back explanation, but have you done any experiments with your work using the Pressbooks and embedding it into Canvas so you get that seamless look, right? Do you do that at all?
That's a fantastic question. Yeah, when I was first coming up with what text resources I wanted to use, I did think about that, and I actually created a Pressbooks personal account and started moving things into that. And what I found was that because I was pulling from so many different sources, and I think in total, I probably have content from 20 to 25 different OER texts. And again, some of it's optional, some of it not, but I really am, I'm picky about the content that I put in front of the students. So I try to find whatever I think is the best representation. So one author may do a great job about describing rhetoric, another author, is way better about quantitative methodology or whatever. And because it's not all coming from Pressbooks, I decided to opt into the Canvas route because I have, and you're right, in terms of sustainability of everything, if I make a change now, it's only going to be live in this version of the course. So that is something that I thought about. For me, that works out okay because I have one live version of the class. And also, so if students want to go back and reference something in a past version of their course, it's available for them. But yeah, I went back and forth with that and ultimately decided I liked the way it looked if I created everything within Canvas and that it wasn't reliant on an external system. So everything was right there in Canvas for the students. So I know linking out, sometimes you could do a phenomenal job with that. And if you just had one resource, then that I probably would have gone that direction. But because I went with a whole bunch of different resources and I changed them up and whatnot, I found it easier just to just have everything centered in Canvas.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, for me, the courses that I've been working on, multiple instructors are using it. So for me, it was easier just to put all the stuff inside the Pressbook. Whatever they keep and delete, they can decide how they want to reorder it, but it's all in the Pressbook that has the most up-to-date content. And so I also teach a course and I'm in like a halfway phase where I'm like, do I want to just point everyone to the Pressbook, or I still have the Canvas pages? So what I ended up doing was, and I've got one of my students on the call here. What I ended up doing is later on in the course was that I used the Pressbook inside there. So it still looks seamless because it's the same content. But that right now I'm in that middle in between place where I'm updating both things rather than just one and done kind of thing. So, but thank you guys. I love the whole idea of transparent and seamless. And I'd never heard transparent used that way before until today. So thank you guys for that.
Go ahead, Raul.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, my bandwidth is a little low here, so I'll stay off video. I'll keep it quick. I know our time is short, but kind of building on Shar's question, referencing like multiple faculty teaching the same course. What would your advice be to, say, more junior faculty who are considering incorporating, an entire textbook, an OER textbook, into their own course? We're at the Teaching and Learning Center here at Clark College, and I've come out of the English department where we partner on this on this kind of work, and I know it can take whole terms, whole years to get a well-functioning OER textbook up and running. So how do you find that balance as a more junior faculty member?
I can take a stab at answering your question. I think that when it comes to a more junior faculty member, particularly one that may be new to the whole concept of OER, I like to point them in the direction of look at some existing texts that have already been created, but that are OER. So search some of those databases or work with a OER librarian if you're fortunate enough to have one, and see if you can find a full, already realized text that is in existence that you could easily sort of incorporate into your class and ask your students to work through. And from there, they can also, like, I worked with an instructor where then I said, during this quarter, while you're teaching, why don't for every other module, because they did weekly modules, I said, for every other module, why don't you locate an activity or a discussion component or some other OER open access piece that you could, using these databases, or even the Canvas Commons, if you use Canvas, that you can pull and that you can incorporate into your course. And I found that that's sort of like giving them the idea of how it works and sort of the freedom that it affords you, and also gives them an opportunity, kind of empowers them to start searching out for some content that they would consider putting into their classes. So that way it's a little bit lower stakes, but they get a sense of how it can be used and the power of it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's really helpful, taking those baby steps. Thanks, Todd.
Yeah, sure. I do want to answer one question that I saw in the chat that Bell asked. They asked if grammar, punctuation, and other writing mechanics are not part of the course and learning objectives, should they be removed in any rubrics? I'm going to say that I personally, my approach to that is that if my outcomes associated with my class are not specifically about improving grammar, understanding of punctuation, and those specific writing mechanics that you may see in like a technical writing course or like an English course or just a written communication class, then I would remove those specifically from the rubric. But I do think it's okay to put in a rubric that you're looking for clarity and you're looking for thoughts that are organized and delivered using transitions and formatting that makes things clear as a reader or a consumer of that information, could also be in speech, what the intended messages of the person who is composing it. So I do think there are ways to still inquire, like ask and acknowledge by showing the rubric in advance that this is something that you're looking for. But like, I know personally, I am not extremely conversant in all of the rules of grammar and punctuation, and honestly, nor do I personally have a huge interest in that, and that's not my area of study or discipline. So I'm not interested in assessing that because that's not something that I have an authority on, and that's not aligned with my class. So my answer to that is, if it's not specifically outlined in your outcomes, and that I would say no. And there's a lot of resources I could share about that too. But I know we're already over time. Okay, well, Jerry, do you have anything else to add at the end here?
I'd like to thank everybody for coming. Let's see if I have any reminders here that I'm supposed to do. Thank everybody for coming. I did put a link to the evaluations in. Let me go ahead and I'll go ahead and put a link to the recordings and or maybe Nina could do that. She did it the first time. There's the recordings. We also have conference Slack that were posted at the beginning. The recordings will be available as soon as the captions are reviewed and fixed. And so I'd like to also thank everybody who showed up, and thank the presenters, Todd and Andrew, for making presentation. It was very interesting. I was wondering about how this related to tilt, and I didn't even have to ask the question. So that was great. And yeah, thanks everybody, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you,
everyone.